the Center for Global Education and the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. We're talking today about journalism, fake news, and disinformation. It should be a wonderful event today. We have our friends and our partners here from MediaSmarts who will be giving a great talk on how do we spot fake news, how we, in this age of mass information, how are we looking at resisting that disinformation? And this week we're celebrating Media and Information Literacy Week with UNESCO. It's being held from the 21st to the 31st of October, and the Republic of Korea is actually hosting it on behalf of UNESCO. And if you go online, you'll be able to find all sorts of great information, events, competitions, and ways to share your own art and your own blogs about what media and information literacy means to you. The Canadian Commission for UNESCO is a partner in this event today, and I mean, they help Canadians share knowledge both locally and globally in order to create a better society and build peace in the minds of men and women and children and all the wonderful people who are a part of our society. And to do so, the Commission facilitates cooperation in the fields of education, science, culture, communication, and information to address some of the most complex challenges facing the world today. And I would think that media and information literacy is one of those great challenges. You'll hear from our speaker today, but also from other students who've been doing the work behind the scenes in preparation for this event and the things that they encountered when they were looking into fake news and disinformation. Now, before we get started, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Treaty 6 land, and it is a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. And together as Canadians, we need to really not just talk about reconciliation, but learn how to practice it in our everyday lives. And so when I give the land acknowledgement ahead of our events, it's not just to as sort of a token. I really do want us to think of how does this embed in our conversation, in our schooling, in our online work. It doesn't have to be something that we just acknowledge and think about shortly and then move on. How is our reconciliation playing into our conversation today? And if I think about media literacy, and I think about voices, and I think about representation, I think about who's being heard and who's not being heard, and how are things being misrepresented or misheard. And to me, the spirit of reconciliation is in that conversation that we're going to have today about respectful relationships, about this ongoing work we need to do to understand the complex nature of communication and relationships and how they all form together. Now I want to invite our friend Matthew Johnson, who's joining us from MediaSmarts today, to say hello to our group and welcome, and we're so excited to have you join us here today. And then after that, I'll maybe invite our schools to say hello and acknowledge their participation as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for inviting me, and hello to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's wonderful to see people from so many different places joining us today to learn about media literacy and about verifying information online.
Thanks so much, Matthew. So I'm going to turn it over to our friends who are joining us from Soldotna, Alaska to do the first welcome. We'll start maybe in the north and work our way south. Over to you, Alaska.
Hi, my name is Anders, and we're in Soldotna on Kenai Peninsula, South Central Alaska. And we'd like to recognize the indigenous people whose land we are on, which is the Dena'ina Athabascan. They arrived in South Central Alaska region somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 years ago, and they're the only Athabascan group to live on the coast. The Global Nomads is a video telecommunications class where we meet other cultures and interview experts in the field of video conferencing. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and welcome, Alaska. Now I know that our school from Toronto is trying to join us right now, and so as soon as you come online, if you want to give me a wave, I'll allow you to introduce yourself. But I do know we have our friends from Bangladesh here. Would anyone from Mumi or Nisa, would you like to give a welcome from Bangladesh?
Hey everybody, I am Anisa from Bangladesh, and with me I have Momi. There is a lot I can talk about when it comes to my country, but I would specifically like to acknowledge the fact that this country is so beautiful when it comes to nature. all of the hills and the streams and the rivers and the culture. It's really amazing. And it's really amazing. What's really fun is we live in harmony with people from different backgrounds. Like we live with indigenous people in the hills that come here and integrate with us and enjoy our culture, and we celebrate everything all together, and it's a really fun way to experience a lot of different values. So hello from Bangladesh, and I really hope you guys visit because we can have a really good time. Thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you so much, Nisa, for sharing. We're so glad that you were able to join us today. I've had a note that we have friends from Brazil joining us on YouTube. And our friend from Toronto sent me a note privately saying, unfortunately, they can't get their audio to work just yet, but they're going to try to get on that. And then our friends as well from Edmonton who are joining on YouTube. Welcome. With COVID, it's really hard in these classrooms to have everyone joining online because of the speaking. And so they've been joining from YouTube and just typing their comments. So we're so excited that you're able to join us today. Please, if you're joining from YouTube, write your comments and your questions in the chat function. We have one of our staff members is there reading the comments, bringing them back into this meeting. And so we can definitely still include you in that dialogue. You're not a part of this event because you aren't on our screen here. We're definitely able to hear what you have to say and join us today. So welcome everyone. And now as more schools join, please send where you're coming from. We'd love to acknowledge you and be able to give you a shout out to your location. So I want to welcome again Matthew Johnson to our from MediaSmarts, the Director of Education. MediaSmarts is Canada Centre for Digital and Media Literacy. Matthew is the author of many of their lessons and parental materials and interactive resources. He's acknowledged as an expert in digital literacy and in the implementation of that into Canadian curriculum. He's the architect of the Use, Understand, and Create Digital Literacy Framework for schools. So this is massive literacy component that you can find online. It's so great. I know a lot of you were using the Break the Fake material that he's contributed to and developed, and some of the quizzes and the tests, and I'm sure he'll go into those, but maybe we can also get you to talk about your experiences with it. He's contributed blogs and articles to websites and magazines. I see that he has been on BBC News and the Globe and Mail and Radio Canada, CBC's The National, which is kind of a Canadian thing, but is a big Canadian thing. So there's that. But welcome today to Matthew. We're so glad you could join us. I'm very excited to what you have to share about media literacy and fake news, because I mean, is there anything that's more important right now, especially with our friends from Alaska? I think we're gonna have a juicy conversation with them. But like really, it's so pervasive in our everyday conversation. I mean, and for you, I'm sure I'll get into this, but it must be such a shift from maybe a few years ago when you started doing this work to now. Kids are talking about fake news every day. It's part of the language. It's part of their talk. Like, anyways, I'm just so excited to hear what you have to say, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm just going to get started. I'm going to share my screen so you can all see our workshop. And welcome to our Break the Fake workshop. We're going to learn today 4 easy ways to tell if something is true online. So this is really nuts and bolts media literacy. Of course, media and digital literacy, it's a very big field, but today we're looking at 4 things you can do anytime you see something online to find out whether it's true or false. Now, to start off, which of these pictures do people think is real? Just take a second for yourself. Think which one of these is more likely to be real. And here's the answer. That's called a peacock spider. It's a real animal, really is that color. Which one of these news sources is real? The Buffalo News or the Buffalo Chronicle? Take a second, take a look, see which one looks more convincing to you. And the answer is this one. The Buffalo News is real. The Buffalo Chronicle is literally fake news. It is an imaginary newspaper, just is a website, and they spread a lot of misleading information. And which of these websites is real? The Shed at Dulwich Restaurant or the Mike the Headless Chicken Festival?
All right, we're gonna do this one as a test.
All right.
Who thinks? Maybe I'll ask, oh, I know who, Daniel. Daniel was like the first one to log on today. So Daniel, what do you think? Which one is it? Daniel from Alaska. Oh, no, he's. All right, we're gonna ask another Alaska person then. Oh, Reagan. How about Reagan?
I think the headless chicken one is the real one.
Thank you, Reagan. Headless chicken is the vote.
All right. So yeah, you probably at this point could guess the one that looks a little more unlikely is the real one. That is an actual festival that's held every year. I think they had to postpone it, unfortunately, this year for obvious reasons, but it's to commemorate a chicken that lived for some time with its head cut off. The other one, the Shed at Dulwich, is an imaginary restaurant. Someone put his shed, made up a website for his shed, and posted the website online. And for a time, it was the highest rated restaurant in England on Yelp. Or maybe it was TripAdvisor, but on one of those restaurant review sites, it was the highest rated restaurant, despite the fact that it was someone's shed and did not actually serve food. So maybe you got that one right. How many people got all three right? Probably not too many. Each time you had a 50-50 chance, wasn't necessarily obvious. Now, sometimes people share misinformation by accident because they really think something is true and it's not, or because they don't think other people will take it seriously. But what I want to show you is that it's not so easy to tell just by looking at something, whether it's true or not. In each of those cases, it could just as easily have been the other way around. That leopard with the brilliant blue eyes could have been real, and the spider could have been photoshopped. The Buffalo News and the Buffalo Chronicle could just as easily have been the other way around. So we can't rely on our eyes, and that's the hardest thing about this. The hardest thing, because we all think that we're smart, that we're smart enough to recognize false information or true information. But the fact is, we're not. The most important aspect of media literacy, the most important aspect of critical thinking is humility. It's learning that we can't do this on our own and that there are really useful tools that we can use to verify things. Most of us have probably shared something we thought was real without checking, and we're more likely to share things that we feel strongly about, especially things we hope are true. And that, again, is true of everybody, especially right now. You see misinformation coming from every side of the political spectrum, from every side of every issue. And it's because we feel strongly. A lot of misinformation isn't trying to get us to believe a particular thing. It's actually designed to make us doubt whether anything is true. So here's an example from a couple of years ago where there were Facebook pages set up for both sides of a protest. There was a Facebook page set up to organize a protest, another Facebook page set up to organize a counter protest, and both of them were set up by the Russian troll agency, the IRA. So misinformation, we can't necessarily think that it's always trying to get us to think a particular thing. A lot of times it's just trying to make us doubt whether anything is true. And that's why even seemingly harmless examples of misinformation matter. Online misinformation hasn't just made us easier to fool, it's made us more cynical as well. If we can't tell what's true, it feels safer to assume that everything is fake. But critical thinking isn't just about doubting everything. It is about learning how to find out what is true. And that's the most important thing to remember. It's not just about debunking. It's about the fact that you can find out what is true, because only truth can break the fake. So in this workshop, we're going to look at 4 quick steps you can take to find out if something is true or not. Those steps are to use fact-checking tools, to find the original source, to verify the source, and to check other sources. Once you've learned them, none of these will take you more than a couple of minutes to do, and some you can do in just 10 seconds. Just one of these steps will usually get you the answer you need, but it's good to know how to do all 4. I'll show you a few different ways to do each one, and then you'll get a chance to try each one out. Now, sometimes a single search can break the fake if a professional fact checker has already done the work for you. Thanks to computers, it's easy to make fake pictures, and a lot of times people will share them without knowing that they're fake. Take these shots of the pyramids shared by two popular Twitter accounts, Picology and History Lovers Club. Well, they both look pretty real, don't they? Or maybe they both look fake. Both accounts have shared plenty of fake and misleading photos. Now, we could do the detective work ourselves, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute, but it's easier to let someone else do it. Let's start with the grandparent of all fact-checking sites, Snopes.com. They've been around since the early days of the internet, and they fact-check all kinds of things. When we go to the Snopes website and search for Zeppelin over pyramid, we can see they've confirmed that this photo is for real. When we search for pyramid clouds, we find they've also checked this photo out and found that it's fake. So fact checkers don't just debunk stories, they verify them as well. There are also fact checkers that specialize in different topics like health or politics or the particular countries. Another way you can see if someone's debunked a false or misleading story is to do a search for the topic of the story and add the words fake or hoax to your search. Now, this can be a bit risky because anyone can say that something is a hoax, so you need to make sure the people debunking it are reliable. To be sure a fact checker is reliable, see if they've signed on to the International Fact-Checking Network's Code of Principles, if you're not familiar with a fact checker. But we've actually made it easier. We've made a custom search engine you can use at this address to search all of these. So it's bit.ly/fact-search. Bitly is a great tool for shortening long web addresses. We'll be using a bunch of Bitlys over the rest of this workshop. And this searches all of these at the same time, and it only searches those. So you won't get searches from fact checkers or other sources that aren't reliable. So here's an exercise that'll show you just how quickly you could find out if something is true or not. This video of Toronto Raptors fans cheering when Golden State Warriors player Kevin Durant got injured was seen and shared more than 1 million times on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Let's take just 2 or 3 minutes to find out if it's true using one of the skills we've just learned. So you can go to bit.ly/Durant cheer, check out the original video, and try doing one of the things we just learned about to see whether this story is true or not.
All right, I'm typing in the background. I put the bit.ly, yeah, it's on the page, but for those who maybe are also here and just want to click with the links inside, I'm going. Who's gonna get there first? From any of our students, you're welcome to unmute yourself and tell us what you found. Oh, my Zoom is making my thing go so slow. Oh, it looks like it. Okay. So does anyone of our students who are on here want to say what they found? I know I've got my screen up. We have Linnea, Lindsay, Daxton. Right, when I'm going to.
Sarah, do you want to pick one? I actually can't see the chat window right now. So do you want to pick someone's response?
It says it's a fake. It's an old watching Game of Thrones.
All right.
Oh, there's a dumpster fire. Someone has dumpster fire emoji.
Okay. Not sure quite what that means, but all right. All right, so let's take a look. So, is this true or not? And more importantly, how did we find out? Because it's not enough just to get the right answer. As we already saw, you got a 50% chance of doing that just by guessing. How did we find out? So we can get the answer either by doing a search with the word hoax or fake added, or by using our custom fact checker search. Either one leads us to fact check AFP, where we can see the video is a fake. The original is actually from a soccer game. Oops. Sorry, I skipped ahead. The original is actually from a soccer game in 2016, and footage of the basketball game on the screen has been edited in. But Snopes did not have anything on this story, which shows you that just because a fact checker hasn't debunked something doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And that's often an issue when you are dealing with stories that happen in Canada or in Bangladesh or other places outside of the United States. Most of the fact checkers are focused, the big fact checkers like Snopes, they're focused on the United States. Now, one of the great things about that International Fact Checkers Network list of signatories that I showed you a little bit earlier is you can find the fact checkers that are working in your country or your region. So you can create your own custom search engine, or you can just bookmark those fact checkers so you can go directly to those as well as to the big ones like Snopes. So it's important to remember that just because a fact checker hasn't debunked something doesn't mean it's true. So if you do get an answer one way or another from a fact checker, you can stop there if you rely on the fact checker. But if nobody has fact checked the story, we move on to the next step, find the original source. Because it's so easy to copy and to share things online, it's important to find out where something originally came from before you decide whether or not to trust it. Someone might have shared it with you on social media, or a news story might be based on someone else's story. One easy way to find the original source is to use a search engine. We might, for instance, wonder if this photo that seems to show a US senator displaying a picture of Aquaman to Congress is real. As we already saw, pictures are easy to fake, and pictures where someone is holding a sign are especially easy, because you just have to change what's on the sign. So we can do a search for his name, add Aquaman, and add C-SPAN, where the picture supposedly came from. We open the link to C-SPAN in a new tab, and we see that this actually does come from C-SPAN's footage of the US Congress. It is a true story. Why exactly he had a picture of Aquaman on the House of, or in the Congress, I don't know, but it really did happen. Another way to find out if a photo, like this one of astronomer Carl Sagan, is real is to do a reverse image search. So we click on the image, then we right-click and select Copy Image Location, and then we go to tineye.com and paste in the address. Now, there are a number of different reverse search engines. Google Chrome, the browser, actually has image search built into it, but TinEye is my favorite, and I'll show you why. If we on TinEye, we can sort the results to show the oldest first. And we can see right away there's a different version of the photo. Because the two are exactly the same, except for what's on the sign, it's most likely that the older one is the original and the one we were just looking at is fake. The text of the sign has been changed. But even if something you see is real, it may not be what the source that shared them says they are. So this photo, for instance, is not actually Charlie Chaplin, but an actress named Thelmy Talia, and it wasn't taken in the 1930s, but in the 1950s. That's why we need to follow links in a story until we get to where information actually came from. So we can see here, the links in this story from the Huffington Post bring us back to the original story that it's based on in the New York Times. There's no sense in trying to figure out whether we can trust this article in the Huffington Post because it's not the original source. That's especially important on social networks, where we usually pay more attention to who shared something with us instead of where it originally came from. You can see on a Facebook page, the sharer is much more prominent than the original source. If there aren't links, look for phrases like the New York Times reported or the word source at the top or bottom of a story. Now, if something presents you with facts or statistics but doesn't tell you where they came from, there's no way to know if you can trust them. This story from Bleacher Report claims that breakdancing and skateboarding are going to become official Olympic events. when we scroll down a bit, we see it's based on earlier stories from Reuters and the Associated Press, which are both reliable sources. Now, to make sure that Bleacher Report is giving us an accurate picture of what those sources reported, we can follow those links, and we see that the story is true. This is a story from Reuters, the news service, and so we can rely on it being true. Make sure, though, that the story really is from that source. A lot of websites, including reliable ones like Reuters, carry sponsored content, paid links to stories on other sites. So you can see, although this main story is accurate and it's got Reuters' legitimacy behind it, the whole top margin and the whole right margin are ads. So those could be done by anybody, and we can't treat those as having the legitimacy of a Reuters article. If there aren't links in a story, you can do a search for the topic plus the sources that are given, like this, saying breakdancing, Olympics, and Reuters, if that's the source that's given. We can also use reverse image search to see if a photo really is what it seems to be. So according to this tweet, this photo shows a terrible mess left behind after an environmentalist protest, but following the steps we learned a few minutes ago shows the photo is actually from a concert in 2014. Very different story. Now it's your turn. Did explorers really find hundreds of animals that were thought to be extinct at a place called the Lost City of the Monkey God? Take a couple minutes to find the original source of this story and see if it's true or not.
All right. Let's have a race between our YouTube and our in meeting. I'm going to grab the go over to our YouTube to see who can get there first. All right. So if you are in the meeting here, you can come up with the answer. Okay, I'm trying to, there's a lot going on my computer at the same time. I should not be to Google this. It's just so exciting. All right, do any of our friends in our meeting room have an answer? From Alaska or Toronto, or friends from Edmonton who are joining on our YouTube? I think they're afraid of being called out and maybe getting the answer wrong.
That's okay. We all make mistakes. I can tell you, I follow on Twitter. On Twitter, I follow dozens of people who study misinformation, and every single one of us has shared some misinformation at least once. It happens to the best of us, and that, of course, is why we're doing this workshop, is to learn. So tell us not just whether you think it's true or not, but also how you found out. What steps did you take? So that's really more important.
I think it's, hi, my name's Sophia. I think
Hi,
it's
Sophia.
true because it had a name on the website, like who wrote the article. Thank you.
Okay, so that's maybe a little bit of evidence that someone's standing behind it, but really that's a pretty easy thing to make up. It's not necessarily a great idea to trust what a website tells you about itself, and we'll see why in the next section. But that's a good start. Obviously, if something doesn't have anyone standing behind it, then that's evidence that you shouldn't trust it. But that's a pretty easy thing to make up. Anybody else? So I see
from our YouTube, we have someone found it on CNN, and so they think it's true. Okay,
good. So finding it on CNN. So that's another one of our approaches that we're going to take a look at in a little bit. I'll show you how the quickest way to do this particular story through finding the original source. So you'll see that this is a tweet, and the tweet is from someone named Nelica Silva, and it links to a story from All Is Interesting. So we don't really care who the person sharing it on Twitter is, because they're just linking to it. So we can forget about them entirely. And we can go to All That's Interesting and take a look at this article, and we can see that it actually comes from another story. So we don't have to worry about All Is Interesting either. We want to go to the original story, and that is run from The Independent, which is a well-known and reliable British newspaper. So that's really all we had to do. To verify this, we just needed to do 2 clicks. We needed to click from the Twitter post to the article, We needed to find where that article was coming from, find that link to the Independent, click on that, confirm that it really is in the Independent, and we can see that this story is true. And that will take you, as I say, 10, 15 seconds.
We had
But
two
of course,
Pat who got it. Mumi and Lindsay both said that it was true. So
yes, very
I
good.
think that our Zoom meeting won that one over the YouTube. So next time, YouTube.
So the question is, what if you didn't know whether the Independent was a reliable source? After all, there are a lot of legitimate news sources out there. There are a lot of newspapers. There are a lot of TV stations, as we already saw with Buffalo. If you don't live in Buffalo, New York, if you don't live near Buffalo, New York, even if you do, odds are good you don't know which one of those is the actual Buffalo, New York newspaper. And how do we know for sure that this is the real website for the Independent? Well, we'll answer those questions when we look at our third step, verify the source. Whether we're looking at a website, a photo or video or a news story, what really matters is whether or not the people who originally created it are trustworthy. We can't always confirm something is false, but if the source isn't reliable, you have no reason to believe it. This is the only time when it matters what order you do the steps in. Reliable sources do sometimes share things that turn out not to be true, and unreliable sources sometimes share things that are true. That's why we shouldn't bother verifying a source until we know for sure it's where the information originally came from. So we didn't want to waste our time verifying that Twitter account, and we didn't want to waste our time verifying all that's interesting. What really mattered was whether or not the Independent is a reliable source, because that's where the story actually came from. When we find the original source, we need to ask three questions. First, does this source really exist? We've seen how easy it is to make fake pictures online, and it's just as easy to make a fake website or a fake social media profile. Second, are they who they say they are? It's also easy to impersonate people online and to create imposter sites or imposter social network accounts. And finally, are they reliable? Anybody can claim to be an expert online, so we need to make sure there are good reasons to think that someone is a reliable source. These days, it's easy to make websites that look just as slick and professional as anything that's out there. In fact, some trustworthy sources may look less professional than fake sites because they haven't put time or money into updating their website. So a lot of government agencies, some older newspapers, a lot of nonprofits sometimes, they don't necessarily have the time or the money to keep updating their website. Or sometimes there'll be something like this Yale School of Art website, which I have to assume is an elaborate joke because it looks like it was made in about 1995 and hasn't been updated since. But this is the actual Yale School of Art website we're looking at here. People who spread misinformation on purpose often invent local newspapers or TV news stations. This kind of source seems trustworthy, but most of us aren't likely to have heard of a paper or TV station in a different city or country. So if you don't live in Australia, you might not know that the Courier Mail is a real newspaper, and it is. Here, for instance, are two websites that claim to be from Sherbrooke, Quebec, the Times and the Record. One of them is real, but which one? Well, both of them have an About Us or a Contact Us page with a street and email address and the names of people who work there. But then all of that is easy to fake. It's just what they're telling you about themselves. So instead, let's go to Wikipedia and see if there's an article there about the Sherbrooke Record. You don't have to go to Wikipedia to search, by the way. You can just put what you're looking for in the search box and add Wikipedia. From the Wikipedia article, we can see the Record has been around for more than a century, and there's no reason to think it isn't a reliable source. How about the Times? Well, there isn't an article about it in Wikipedia, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not real. Wikipedia is written by volunteers, so a lot of things don't have entries. And again, that's especially true for things outside of the United States. There's a pretty strong American bias to English language Wikipedia. Instead, we do a search on Google, and here we find the only results we can find are the website itself, its Twitter account, and articles pointing out that it's a fake. So we can see the Sherbrooke Times is not a real news source. And that's the important thing. We're not relying on what they tell us about themselves. We're looking for signals that are hard to fake. We're looking for what reliable sources say about them, or in this case, an absence of evidence. Here, we have no evidence, even if there weren't stories that told us it was fake. The fact that the only results are the website itself and the Twitter feed would tell us we have no reason to trust it. It is easy to pretend to be someone else online, so once you know the source really exists, you need to find out if what you're looking at really came from them. Did Toronto police really put out a warning about a man in a Spider-Man costume webbing streetcar lines? Some social networks like Twitter and Instagram verify users by putting a blue check mark next to their name. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean they're a reliable source. The blue check mark doesn't tell us anything about their reliability, but it does mean that they are who they say they are. So in this case, it means this is a real Toronto police account, which means this story about Spider-Man is true. It's a bit harder to make sure you're on the right website. People have made fake versions of real news websites like The Guardian and the CBC that look almost exactly like the real thing. So what you're looking at now are fake versions of The Guardian and the CBC, and they are almost indistinguishable from the real ones. But there are things that are harder to fake. A web address by itself doesn't tell you if a site is reliable. For instance, sites with .org addresses are not necessarily more trustworthy, and that's something you need to know. Anyone can get a .org address, so that's by itself is not evidence that a site is trustworthy. But the web address can tell you if you're on an organization's real website. So here, this site, it's got UNESCO.org, so we know this is the real UNESCO website. If we're satisfied a source is real and is who they say they are, now we have to find out if they're trustworthy. For sources of general information like newspapers, that means asking if they have a process for making sure they're giving you good information and a good track record for doing it. This is important when you're looking at sources that maybe aren't entirely fake, but that might only give you part of a story or may not have high standards in making sure what they post is accurate. Unreliable sources sometimes do share things that are true, and as we can see here, even reliable sources make mistakes sometimes. In general, though, if you see a story from a source you know is reliable, you can assume it's probably true. Let's look at another pair of newspapers, the Washington Times and the Washington Post. They are both real newspapers, and neither one is entirely unreliable, but one is a lot more reliable than the other. There are signs you can look for to decide how reliable a news source is. How often do they make mistakes? If they do make mistakes, do they admit to them and publish corrections? Are they willing to publish things that their owners or their readers wouldn't agree with? If we look up the Washington Post on Wikipedia, we can see it's been around since 1877, and it's won dozens of Pulitzer Prizes for journalism. Now, it's not perfect. They've published a few stories that turned out to be inaccurate, which they retracted and corrected publicly. But overall, it has a very good track record. The Times has also been around for a while, since 1982, but their track record is not as good. Most of the Wikipedia article is about things they've spread misinformation about, from the ozone layer to secondhand smoke. That doesn't mean the Times is an entirely unreliable source or that the Post never makes mistakes, but it does mean most of the time you'll do a lot better trusting the Post. For more specialized sources, you want to ask whether they're experts or authorities on that topic. Being an expert is more than just being a doctor or a scientist or a professor. We need to make sure they're an expert in the right field. A cardiologist would be an expert in treating your heart, but not on vaccines. Some sources, like certain professional groups or government agencies, are recognized authorities on particular topics. What they say carries more weight than any single expert in the field and a lot more than a person or group who isn't an authority. But how do you know who's an authority? Remember, anyone can call themselves a university or an institute on the internet. This news story on how to get cheaper flights is based on a survey by an organization called Skyscanner. The advice in it, including the tip to book through a travel website instead of directly from an airline, comes from Alex Estania, one of their travel industry experts. But if we do a search for Skyscanner, it shows us they are a travel website, while a search for Estania's name shows he's actually their product manager. So they're not really an authority at all. Now we know Skyscanner is not an authority and Estania is not an expert. They have an ulterior motive. They have a bias towards getting us to book with travel websites. Now you can give it a try. Let's take a look at two similar looking groups, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Pediatricians. Both claim to represent American pediatricians. Which one are we more likely to trust? Let's take a couple of minutes to find out.
All right, everyone. I want your sleuthing skills on. I'll be checking the comment sections for see who can put in their thoughts first. A great chance for our students from Toronto who are unable to use their audio to pop in a guess. Who will win? Alaska, Bangladesh, Brazil, Toronto, Edmonton, any of our other friends joining us online. Well, it looks like we have a vote for the AAP.
Okay. And now remember, the question is not just which one is more reliable, but how do we know? So let us know.
Another vote for AAP.
Okay.
All right. Does anyone from Alaska or Canada want to unmute or Bangladesh and say what they're thinking? It's hard. You don't want to be made to feel silly. I can understand.
Mm-hmm.
But people are just voting. They aren't really giving their backup. All right. It doesn't look like AC is getting any votes.
So let's take a look at how we can find out. So both of them claim to represent American pediatricians. They both have .org websites. They both have professional looking websites that provide lots of general information. But if we do a search for the AAP and scroll past the web result for their own website, we can see they have 64,000 doctors as members. A search for the ACP shows they have just 500 members and a much weaker claim to be an authority on children's health. So there, that would take us about 20 seconds doing a search for each one. Looking more closely shows us the ACP is not just unreliable though, because it's not an authority. Like Skyscanner, it also has a strong bias because, as Lindsay pointed out, the whole reason its members split from the AAP was because they were opposed to letting gay and lesbian parents adopt children, and that's in their Wikipedia article. It's important not to mix up authority and bias. Someone who is actually an expert on something will have stronger opinions about it than someone who isn't, but they'll be better informed opinions. The difference is that the AAP's positions, which are on everything from car seats to when the school day should start, are based on the expertise of their members. They start with that expertise and come to the conclusions from there. The ACP starts with their beliefs, mostly about sexuality, and come to their positions from there. Our last step, check other sources, may sometimes be the last one you do, but it could also be the first. It's a good way of sifting out bias and finding out whether something like a news story is for real. Did this politician really do a Facebook Live video with a cat face filter on? If we do a search for Pakistani politician cat filter and switch to the news tab, we see the story was covered by many different news outlets, from Global News in Canada to the BBC. This really did happen. In this step, we're not worried about the reliability of a single source. We're looking for a consensus among mostly reliable sources that something actually happened. The news tab on Google is better than the main search because it's more curated. While not every source that's included is perfectly reliable, they're all news outlets that really exist. This step is also important for getting context, making sure you get the whole story. Remember that all sources make mistakes sometimes, but reliable ones correct them. Consulting other sources can help you find out if the first place you saw something might have been leaving something out. This is a good way of dealing with the possible bias in any one source, because we can see, in some cases, dozens of news stories about a topic at the same time. You can also use this step to find out whether something fits with what most of the experts on that topic agree, what's called the consensus view. In fields like medicine, science, and history, consensus has been built up over time, with each new piece of evidence tilting the scales in its favor. Something that goes against the consensus may eventually turn out to be right, but it needs more and better evidence to outweigh the consensus. While it's generally good to give both sides of a story, including views that experts agree aren't right can actually spread misinformation. An article on the pyramids, for example, doesn't have to mention that some people think they were built by aliens. News outlets and Wikipedia may not always be the best place to look for consensus on health and science, because the people writing the articles often aren't experts. For those topics, you want to turn to sources that you know are authorities. Now here's another video, this one claiming that the North Pole is moving. We've made a custom search, bit.ly/science-search, that looks just at sources whose writers are experts in the fields they write about, from Scientific American to Nature to that should be New Scientist, and so on. A quick search for North Pole moving using this search engine tells us that while not every detail in that video might be true, it is true the magnetic pole is shifting. You can use this step together with the last one by building your own toolbox of sources you've confirmed are reliable. So in fact, anyone with a Google account can make their own custom search engines. So you can make this for a topic, you can make this for your favorite history sources or your favorite sources on any topic for all of the reliable newspapers in your region. Custom search engines are a really great way of sifting out less reliable and less relevant results. Now it's your turn. According to this article, scientists at NASA have said that we're entering into a solar minimum, which might cause a mini ice age. Take a couple of minutes, take a look at this article and see if this fits with the scientific consensus.
All right, friends. I know I got out my extra computer so that I could start doing this without interrupting our Zoom feed here. So I'm Googling. So I went to Google and then the news section, right? And I popped it in there.
Okay, so you can go to Google and do a search and click the news tab, or you can use our custom news search or our custom news or science search, or there are a couple of other things that we just covered in the last chapter to see whether this story fits with the scientific consensus or not.
All right, my friends.
Cover the different ways we can do that in a minute.
What's the consensus here? Do we have any scientists in the making who are willing to say whether or not they searched? We're getting some word here that NASA is saying this might not be true.
All right.
Anyone else come up with thoughts on it?
All right. So there are, as before, there are a number of different ways. Okay, so we can check it against a source that we know is reliable. So actually going to the NASA website, and we know this again, we can check. .gov is one of those web addresses that is not open to everybody. So we can check the NASA website, find that it's false. We see another article from The Guardian, which we know is a pretty reliable source, saying that it's false. So those are good ways of doing it. And we can do a news search. So if we go to, you can see it's the news tab up there. We go to solar minimum ice age. We do a news search and we find that most of the results are all a single story in the Express newspapers, and all the others are sources you've probably never heard of. So when only a single source is reporting something, there's good odds that it's probably not really news. Now, sometimes sources do scoop other ones. Every now and then you'll get a single newspaper that it is ahead of everybody else, but it's still usually a good idea to be cautious when something like that is being shared, especially if it's not a source that you know is reliable. So if it's coming from the Globe and Mail or the New York Times or another source that you know is pretty reliable, then that it may be evidence that they've got a scoop. But when it's from a source that you don't already have reason to trust, you want to be extra skeptical. We can also quickly check the Wikipedia article on solar minimum and press Control F to search. And you can do this on any website. Wikipedia, any website, press Control F in a Windows device. It's Command F on a Mac, and there are different ways of doing it on mobile devices, but no matter how you're browsing, you can always search the website. And that saves so much time. So here we go to the solar minimum website, we search for ice age, and you can see the phrase does not appear at all. If we want to take another minute and browse the article, we'll learn pretty quickly solar minimum refers to sunspots and solar flares and not temperatures. And finally, a search of our expert sources, that science search, shows us that while the solar minimum is real, it won't result in cooler weather here on Earth. Now that you've learned all the steps, it probably didn't take you more than a minute to check both of those. And that's good, because for misinformation to spread, people like us have to share it. That's why we have to take these steps to double check before we share anything we see online every time, because only you can break the fake.
So awesome. I think that's great. I mean, like, checking the source, verifying the source, like all those sorts of, it's just so valuable as we're moving into this, as we live within this immersive time of media and news and the rhetoric around fake news. Now, I know that there's a lot of questions and this is such a great conversation. It's hard to limit ourselves. And I would have loved to talk more about why the hippo, because I remember the North American house hippo ads from, I guess it's like 20 years ago now, from when I was a kid. And the North American house hippo is like this ad that we used in Canada, at least, to question media. And so that was why there's the hippo, I think, at least I think.
Yes, that's right. So that was last year we relaunched the House Hippo PSA, a new version of the House Hippo PSA. You can see it on our website. You can see it on YouTube. And we've actually just launched a website, which is househippofoundation.org. And it is a website that includes all of the things that people often think are signs that something is reliable, but aren't. So it's got a .org web address, it's got an About Us page, it's got a lot of information, it's got no ads, it's got a nice clean layout. It is something that is really great for teachers to show that a lot of the things that we instinctively look for as signs of reliability aren't. The headless one is real, yes.
So wonderful. So I'm going to open it up to questions now. Maybe our homework assignment will be that everyone needs to go to YouTube and Google the old North American house hippo videos so they can relive my childhood. I know that we do have some questions here that I would love to get to. I also have, if we have time, some of the responses that were in our virtual classroom of students who did the Break the Fake test and then had some comments about how they thought they were media savvy and were really sort of called out on their thoughts there.
Well, and you shouldn't feel bad. If you did badly on the Break the Fake test, you shouldn't feel bad. And if you did well, you shouldn't feel proud, because in every case, it was arbitrary. The whole point of that test is to show that you can't tell just by looking at something. But the only way we can reliably verify is to use other tools, to use fact checkers, to verify a source by doing a Google search or looking at Wikipedia or other sources, or to consult other sources to find out context and consensus. So don't feel bad if you did that poorly, and if you did well, doesn't necessarily mean you'll do well with a real source of misinformation.
All right, I'm going to open up to questions now. I know some of our friends have already indicated to me privately that they have some questions. So you can either raise your hand or unmute. I know there's questions. I know, Mr. Sparks, some of your students had questions. Oh. Well, they get them. Oh, Mr. Sparks, did you want to?
Well, I was going to say, Sophia, you've got the first question from our classroom. Derek, you also have one as well. So go ahead, Sophia. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm thinking. I'm panicking a little.
So I have a question. Well, Sophia remembers hers. It was, I mean, Trump, as we all know, there's the election coming up, and really he's made sort of fake news something that everyone says and thinks about. And I'm wondering, like, what do you think the long-term impacts on journalism are to have it every time that a politician or not even Trump per se, but any politician says that when they're challenged that something is fake? How does that impact journalism as like a media or an important sort of representation of knowledge in our? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, and I think it really is having a couple of different effects, because I think it has, in a small number of cases, it has kind of polarized people, because when there's someone that you believe in who tells you that someone else is lying, you have to make a choice. And sometimes that belief is stronger, or the desire to believe is stronger than the evidence that something else is reliable. But at the same time, I think over the last 4 years, we actually have seen a renewed trust in media and in mainstream or in legitimate media. And I think we've also seen and are seeing better efforts from legitimate news sources to explore their process. Because for a long time, these media sources have basically just said, trust us, and because 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was hard to get news on the air or on the radio. It was hard to print a newspaper. All of these barriers meant that most people who were doing it, they put up a lot of money, and so they couldn't risk people seeing them as unreliable. But now anyone can send a signal. Anyone can put up a YouTube video or post a rumor on Facebook or set up a website that looks like a real newspaper. And so news outlets, legitimate news outlets, are having to do a bit more to show what their process is, to explain, well, this is how we make sure that what we're reporting is accurate. This is what we do when we make a mistake. And that's why these are the things that we teach people to look for. And I will also say that, we shouldn't uncritically accept even legitimate news sources, because a lot of times they leave things out. They will often, we know, for instance, that things like police violence against Black communities was undercovered for many, many years. The only reason it got increased coverage was because of social media. So it's not that these sources are perfect. It is that fairly often we are weighing less reliable against more reliable sources. Okay, looks like we've got someone ready to go in the chat.
I'm gonna throw over to Derek now to ask his question.
I think Derek's muted.
Yeah.
He may be having bandwidth issues at home.
Okay,
too.
well, Derek, you can ask your question in the chat if you'd rather, if you want to type
I
it.
can go.
Okay.
Sophia, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Sophia. How do you think journalism quality has gone up or down since the internet has become more advanced? Thank you.
I think there's a mix. I mean, again, your mainstream news outlets definitely are feeling more pressure from other sources of news. So I think a lot of individual news outlets are working harder. At the same time, they have lost a lot of revenue. A lot of news outlets have a lot less staff than they did. Way less than 20 years ago, significantly less than 10 years ago. There's a lot less money in that business. And unfortunately, when there are cuts, the cuts usually come at the staff level and they come at the reporting staff level. It's not the executives who lose their jobs. It's the reporting staff and the other people, all the people who support the reporting staff. So if you're on the radio and you have to be your own producer, that's less time for you to be a reporter. And I know that from being interviewed. That 10 years ago when people interviewed me, there would be a producer and there would be a reporter and there would be a technician, and now it's not the reporter doing the same thing, doing all of those things. So there are a lot of pressures on them, and I think it's also true that a lot of journalists need a little bit more digital literacy, because reporters don't necessarily know these skills. They don't necessarily know, when they see something on Twitter, when they see a hashtag trending on Twitter, they don't necessarily know how easy it is to manipulate these things. And we have seen quite a few times, particularly in 2016, but also more recently, where reporters at legitimate news outlets have been suckered into covering not necessarily totally false things, but covering things in a way that meets the agenda of a particular group, or giving things more attention than they really warrant. And I think we've seen that in the early days of the pandemic with the anti-mask protests, where really early on, they were very much a fringe thing and they got more coverage than they probably warranted. And now, in part because of that, they've grown.
Thanks so much. Now, we're already 4 minutes past the hour, and there's just so much more questions in the chat, and I would have loved to share the student work. I want to thank Morgan, Sarah, and Sophia, as well as our friends Daxton. Daxton had an amazing post about fake news and specifically around vaccines. It was awesome. So thank you to them for posting that. Maybe I'll put it on our website so that people can see what their reactions were and what their thoughts were, because even as teens, you think you're more savvy than perhaps, or you think you have the skills. And I know Linnea here asked a question about Wikipedia, and if anyone can edit it, is it really that legitimate? And how do we fact check even our fact checkers? And so, I mean, there's just so much to talk about in regards to this.
I do want to get to that one. I want to take an extra minute because that's a really important one, because Wikipedia, so one thing to realize is every Wikipedia article is a separate source. So there's Wikipedia, first of all, is a good place to get general consensus. It's a good place to find out whether something is basic, whether it exists or not, whether it is a real news site or a biased news site or a parody news site. The really high profile ones do get locked or limited to editors that have experience. So it's no longer true that anyone can change one. And the other thing that you should know is that even when malicious changes get made, they get reverted almost quickly. So actually, if you look at the Wikipedia page for house hippos, and if you look at the edit history, and that's another thing about Wikipedia, you can look at what editors are saying, you can look at the discussion they're having in the talk page, you can also look in the edit history, and you can see in the edit history of the house hippo article that someone did change it to say that house hippos were real, and within an hour, that was changed back. So Wikipedia is a lot more reliable than it was 10 years ago. You do have to use it with caution. You want to use it as a general source, a starting place, but what you want to do really is look at the sources at the end of each Wikipedia page, follow those links, because that's the information that it's summarizing, and most often those will be more reliable sources or sources that you can verify.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Matthew, for sharing your knowledge about all of this today. It's a complex topic, and you really do have to do your digging. We all have that due diligence, that responsibility, that before we share something, or before we argue a point with our family, that we should look into, like, what are our sources and who are we advocating for and on what agenda, and not become victims to spreading false information. So thank you. I think this is just such a wonderful topic, a wonderful presentation today. So thank you. Matthew. Thank you, MediaSmarts, and our partners at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO for helping this partnership happen today. We hope to see you again online soon. And thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day or
Thank
evening
you.
for our friends in Bangladesh. A nice sleep. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.